Thank you very much for all the help that you've given us to keep this situation, this monastery, this teaching, this teacher, and this community continuing. And please continue to help us if you can. This evening's talk title is Open Discipline. Could also be called situational discipline, could be mutual discipline. The idea with discipline is some kind of a structure or form, some way of working with whatever it is that you're dealing with, where you can have, there can be some kind of shape to it so that you just don't turn into a giant jelly roll of falling in every which direction. And this is maybe situational in some situations. It might be better to, even though there's a strong form that you are about to walk into, it may be better in that situation to look at what that is and move in another direction other than conform to what has been laid out either by you in your practice or by, if you're living in a monastery or in a temple or in a location where their forms are already set in place. So it's because it is so situational and is so different with each person. It's hard to determine how you should come up with a standard. So how you should relate to that. The standard is the discipline. The standard is the structure. And if you've ever been to this monastery, you'll see that the structure is very definite. It's not moving around. It's definite. What moves around is your mind stream and your activity. So if someone is here, they agree. You're not forced. Nobody's forcing you to do anything. You can live wherever you want. So far in this country, and I do emphasize this so far part. But once you do decide to conform to a particular way of conducting your life and your discipline as a meditator, possibly even as a monk, or at least a very serious person who takes this awareness practice seriously, not just a weekend warrior, so to speak. Sometimes it's talked about that way. This does not do away with or push aside and make irrelevant someone who just practices a mindfulness practice that is just a few hours a week. That's totally appropriate. It's up to you. This is another way in which it's situational. You need to determine what you want to do, not just buy into somebody's promises. You won't get promises from this person. You will get encouragement if you need it, if you ask for it, if you put yourself in a position where you can be encouraged. So, but having been around a while and having practiced this for pretty close to 50 years, different forms, and also having two different traditions, the Zen tradition, the Tibetan tradition, and not to leave out the Shambhala approach to training the mind also. And also the cultural situation that we are endeavoring to create, build, establish a way of practicing the Buddhist teaching, the teaching of the Buddha, coming out of different cultures, different directions, and then coming together in this situation where we are. There's no tradition or history here of Buddhism being here, other than the last 100 years or so. Of course, you could go to that, but it's not very strong. It takes a long time for this to take root. So I'm happy to have some questions around this. That might be the best way to do it, because with each person it's so specific, and some people's tendency to find a form and go right in and actually use that form to support their practice. Another person has an aversion to committing to anything, especially any kind of repetition, where you're going to do this every day, no matter what, or you're going to do this 3 days a week, 1 day a week, 7 days a week, 8 days a week. You're going to do this. So you would know what you need to do, but you may not know it the first few months, few years of what's the best way for you personally to approach this. It tends to get very complicated when we try to figure it out. It may be better, probably is better, to just practice and then use the forms that are showing up. This is why, after many, many years of practicing in different sanghas, different situations altogether, I have seen that it is very necessary to have very strong forms. My son, Takudo, once said, I think it was a couple of years ago, I don't remember, when he first came stumbling back towards this situation, looked around and looked at the forms and looked at the monks that were here, which he's also been a monk since, I think, 1990, maybe 91. But looked at what the schedule was here and says, you can't do this. These people are going to burn out. And I said, why do you think so? He said, it's just too intense. It's just too much. And I said, no, they won't. But I didn't bother to explain anymore because he didn't ask me. And I'm not about to lecture my 55-year-old son about anything. He's not watching right now, I don't think, because he's on a flight to Nepal. Isn't that true? For those of you who keep track of him. So the reason I could say, no, they won't, is I know the way that we reinforce those forms. How do we reinforce them? We don't. Because each person here is not treated like a 12-year-old. They're treated like an adult, even if they occasionally don't act like one. But they're treated that way so that they have the chance to actually be their own discipline. This is not ancient India, China, Japan, Tibet, where if you look into the history of the way tulkus or young monks were trained in Tibet, it was pretty intense. They had their butts kicked by the older monks in order to what? Discipline them. Not a good idea. A person should be respected, needs to be respected, especially someone who comes this way and wants to train their mind to see the truth based on inspiration around the Buddha's teaching, the Buddha Dharma, awakened truth. Then we need to provide the form, but enforcing it or making it some kind of a discipline that you have to obey. I had some very early training in that kind of discipline by being in the Marine Corps, which some of you have heard me say. It's pretty intense. Different kind of discipline, very macho, very controlling, and the object there is to control people. You might say otherwise. And it works quite a bit. It's based on fear of going to the brig and getting locked up. So open or mutual, where we do this together. We don't just have one mafioso at the top who controls everything, but we have really, really strong communication about what's happening with each person. That takes a lot more time than just setting out the orders or the forms and then making sure everybody follows it. It takes communication. And what is that? Listening. And what is that? Listening. But in order to listen, the one who is is to be listened to has to say something. So you have to say what's happening to you. You have to talk about what's happening to you, what you're going through. We do a fair amount of that here. Still trying to find out what is the optimum way of having communication work. This is why we have book studies rather than I come and teach everything, or we just are sent off all on our own and we're all studying Dan Lusthouse or Bill Waldron or Red Pine or any of the other scholars that we may never even meet. Instead, we take the material and we study it together and we interact, talk about it, ask questions of each other, ask questions of the teacher. We're coming up to a very change in the practice. The way we've been doing Ango is just to do it about 4 days, and it's been taking more of the form of the arts, sometimes of opening the I-mind practice, which we will probably continue to do, but do on long weekends rather than try to crowd it into Ango or Sesshin. So Sesshin will probably continue to go 8 days, thereabouts, but it will happen in April rather than in the time when everybody gets the flu and it's pretty miserable around here. But then the entire month of February, which I believe is 28 days this year, is that true? Anybody want to vouch for that? That entire period is going to be very, very strong form, sitting practice of meditation, which is what we need. We all need to do this. There needs to be a big dose of it, maybe several times a year, maybe once a week. We need some kind of that's why the block sitting is emphasized or created or encouraged. Sit down for 4 hours and don't do anything else. Just watch what moves in the mind stream without validating it, refuting it, agreeing with it. Don't do anything with it. So the form for that isn't completely settled yet. Sokuzan and I have been looking at that for some time, still are, but that will be sent out pretty quick so you'll have a description of what that is. And then it would be up to you. I mean, the encouragement is do the whole damn thing. Why not 1 month out of the year? Do the whole thing. It's going to be a lot of sitting practice. The first time I ran into something like that was in 1975 when Trungpa Rinpoche actually created something called a datun, which means to sit for a month. Yintun means to sit for a day. That was the other thing he devised. And sitting for a month that's all it was. Now, if you go and sit what's called a datun at Drala Mountain, just name has changed there recently. It was Rocky Mountain Dharma Center, then it was Shambhala Mountain Center, and now it's Drala Mountain. If you were to go there and sit the month-long practice there, you wouldn't just sit, you would do a lot of other things too. And I'm not sure what they're doing today, but fairly recently they would have other teachers and people give talks on various things. There would also be a whole lot of sitting too, so I'm not taking that away. It's just that the emphasis would not be on sitting, which in this 1975 Datun was, I don't know how many hours. It was 8 or 10 hours. It was probably closer to 10 hours a day. And Trungpa Rinpoche had it switched up so you never had any idea when there would be a walking meditation or when there would be so you would sit and sit and sit. And then the recommendation was you wouldn't go to the restroom unless it was during walking meditation. That way you would get the maximum amount of sitting practice in. And there was always a thing at the beginning where the rumor would get out, there's one session in here that is 5 hours long. And that was designed by Rinpoche. So what we do with the block sitting is we say, sit the whole 4 hours if you can. But it's an open discipline. If you can't, then pay attention to what your body is saying. So rather than try to get the mind to control the body, to hold still, don't move, or in the Zen tradition, they'll come and hit, in the Rinzai, they'll hit you with one of these sticks. Even in the Soto Zen tradition, they still may yell at you for moving around. Different kind of discipline about control. If someone's very controlled, then does that mean they're disciplined? Apparently, some people feel that that's the case. Same thing would be happening in the Ango. The whole month would be sitting. That's the way it's looking right now. And you do the best you could, but you would do it with your body, with your feelings, with your emotions, with your thought patterns, and with your life. We're not in ancient Tibet, Japan, Korea, or China, or India. We're here, right here in the West, with this kind of communication with Zoom. So you, even though you're living halfway across the country, you'll be able to participate. You'll be able to participate in real time by sitting down with people who are sitting down and facing the wall at the same time you are. And the gong will ring at certain times that will be laid out that you'll know about ahead of time, and there'll be long sitting periods. I don't do away with walking meditation. I just don't think that when you're sitting, and it is your meditation, not this person's or that person's or the person who is striking the gong, your meditation. This is really important. This took decades for me to realize this. Does that make it the truth? No. Do whatever you want to do. But you can consider what I'm saying. Someone else should not be telling you when to get up and walk and when to sit back down, even though we respectfully do that kind of a practice during the 8-day Rohatsu session, especially this year. It's your body-mind complex, which are not separate. You need to decide, because your body tells you, you need to move this leg. That's not wrong. I'm not going to go into the story about it, but I had to experience that the hard way by applying my stubbornness. I'm not getting up no matter what. If my legs fall off, I'm not getting up. That's not a good approach to discipline. Although my Marine Corps drill instructor would have been proud of me, probably, because that's the way they do that there. So it's important to respect your body, how your body feels. Just because you're sitting, and one person can sit for 3 hours, maybe without moving at all, quite intimidating. But if you were to climb inside of their mind, you probably wouldn't be so intimidated, because their mind may look more like a hornet's nest. Whereas another person who's moving and adjusting, they may be fairly calm in terms of or fairly stable as far as what's happening in the mind stream, which isn't necessarily credential, but their body may be giving them a hell of a hard time. They can't sitting just for a few minutes and they start to ache, or that something starts to hurt. There were people in the Shambhala tradition who taught, who never had any body pain, who were teachers, and of course they couldn't understand why you would have such a difficult time, because it didn't bother them any. They could sit there for an hour or two without moving at all. Shambhala tradition and the Kagyu tradition that it was called back in the early 70s. So when I say open, I'm saying it's up to you. No one is going to come and do this practice that is not sincere, and at least not for very long. They will see something in it, they will understand something in it, and that understanding will be a lot more clear if that person is respected for what they're doing with their body and their mind day to day. Just as anyone who's lived in the monastery for any length of time knows that if they don't come to forums, then someone will talk to them, probably at this point, the Sukansu. It could be me, and I would just ask, what's going on? How are you doing? Or, I see you're not at this or this or this, and that we would have a conversation about it. And it's possible the person should live somewhere else. That doesn't mean we're kicking anybody else out. We might say, well, what can you do? Say, well, I could come to 2 book studies a week out of what, 11, I think there is right now, spread around, that you can actually join on Zoom. And you don't have to be in the Zendo proper. And well, you can't, you're only sitting 45 minutes to an hour a day, something like that. You need to do more than that in the monastery. And so if you do, but if you say, I can't do that, then we would find out, well, what's happening, why? And it could be anything from sore knees to any number of things. And one might be encouraged to sit in a chair. The important thing about sitting, and again, this comes from decades of thinking otherwise. The important thing is the stillness part. Even though you might see me sitting here during, as it is meditation, fiddling around or falling asleep, or be very careful about what you're evaluating and what you're judging. Because anytime you evaluate anything or judge anything, that's a way of covering up what's happening in your own mind stream. And not being responsible for your own mind stream. Don't judge. If you do judge, then don't judge that. Double negativity, you don't need it. So I would take this up to and including you. It's time to practice. It's a Nyintan, or I'm not a Nyintan. I'm getting trapped into Tibetan language. It's an all-day sitting, a retreat, but instead you want to go party. Maybe you should. Maybe there's a picnic, or maybe there's something going on that you really need to do. So we have to be really careful not to evaluate how somebody else's practice. Just because you can sit there and practice and you hardly miss anything, and somebody else seems to have big gaps in the time that you see them, because you're here all the time, you know who's here. We have Zoom. We can watch people, watch each other. And the Doan and the Doshi and the teacher and the Sukansu, the abbot can watch and observe, and other people can observe what's coming and what's going. You have to be very careful to be responsible for your practice and not overflow onto somebody else while they're not doing what you're doing. I can take some questions now. Please give them to me. I'll do my best. Go ahead.
Junshu bowing. Feels like I'm often rigid with myself in terms of the forms. How can I have some creativity in that area?
Go the other way. Not to go the other way to get out of the forms. But I think you're serious. I've known you for years. You've lived here for years. So I feel like you're serious about this. But I'm not particularly keeping track of what you're doing, but other people are. I don't need to keep track with a whole community of people that are training their mind. Pardon me. Am I missing my track? No. Well, let me say it bluntly. You're not doing any, you're doing fine. Just keep going. Evaluate. Evaluation just leads in circles, right and wrong, up and down, back and forth. They should, and I shouldn't. He's doing this, but I can't do that. Why can't I do that? Maybe I should make myself. Don't make yourself do anything. Don't do what you're told. You heard that teaching very much? Who's telling you that? Don't do what you're told. Actually, if you follow that, you're doing what you're told. Those darn Zen people. So what am I saying there? Not that you shouldn't follow someone's guidelines or follow someone's recommendation on something, but first you should really look at it and see what is that about, and what is your intention? And what does it seem like the other person's intention is to even set up such a thing for you? I think if you got burned out here, and this is Takodo was referring to, or a couple of years ago, that would be just a misunderstanding of the form and what we're doing here. Does anyone here, for instance, feel pressured from me? Where's the pressure coming from?
Mm-hmm.
Observe, observe, observe. Find out. Find out. Get to know yourself. This is what this is for. Find out. You're a young woman. You have lots of time. More than likely, you have a lot of time ahead of you. Get to the cushion as much as you can. Get to the book studies. So there's some kind of intellectual dynamic going on with Sangha. The Dharma that we're studying, whether it's Trungpa Rinpoche or whether it's Kobun Roshi's work or the Lankavatara Sutra, any of the other sutras, Heart Sutra, Diamond Sutra, Samdhi Nirmachana Sutra, study those with Sangha and ask questions. More?
Bowing. If we are feeling burnt out, is wanting a break a way of avoiding the forms?
There's different ways of looking at it, and I've heard Trungpa Rinpoche say something like, one time somebody made a comment on His Holiness the 16th Karmapa, Rongjung Rigpi Dorje, and he was sitting next to an altar, and there was a Coke bottle sitting next to him, and then the reportage there in that particular magazine, I don't know whether it's whatever, the Harper's or Time or Life, I don't know what it was, but it says, His Holiness takes a break. And Trungpa Rinpoche says, His Holiness never takes a break. He can't take a break. There's nothing there to break. So, and you could say that instead of looking at that like a break, look at it as if this is something you need to do. It's choiceless. You need to do this. The ego mind will come in because it starts to feel embarrassed about everyone else is sitting, but you're going to going to the beach or going to Lake Michigan. Would that be a good example of, should I be doing this? Like aren't you going next weekend to visit your folks? Aren't you guys both going to? Yeah. Of course, you could say, well, also it's New Year's and all that, but it's difficult to put it into words because everyone is so different. Everyone is dealing with a different mind stream, a different way of working with negativity. So I feel like that's totally appropriate. Do you feel like it's okay, or do you feel a little guilty about doing that? That's what you need to look at. I'm not getting that from me. But if you never came, every weekend you were going somewhere else, and you were not attending any book studies or one a month, and you were not meditating in here, and there's several people here that will let me know who's meditating and who's not. I don't even have to ask. All they have to do is have an interview with me, and they will tell me. Or not so much by way of complaint, but because there's more respect than that, but a little bit of talk about someone. Why is it that person never really practices very much? Something like that. They don't say that about you. Yes, Biyun.
I don't think I could do this without the encouragement to make it my own, without having a form, without reinforcement.
Yes.
But there's also a fear that arises when approaching making something my own, and what is that going into?
Yeah, that's actual, true, genuine responsibility. The ability to respond in a genuine way to whatever arises, including your own health, your feeling of how you're feeling, and all the other emotions and things that arise in the mind stream that give us a hard time, that make us feel like something's wrong, we got to correct something, we can't do this any longer. More?
Is that fear something to not like keep track of, but to go into, I guess?
I wouldn't go into it too much. just if you're sitting a lot, then what you need to look at is going to show up rather than you need to kind of go into it. This is not psychology. That doesn't mean that psychology in some situations is totally necessary. People are not going to do this. Buddhist psychology is quite a bit different than cognitive behavioral therapy or all the other therapies. This doesn't mean that someone who's teaches Buddhism couldn't also be a therapist and work with things in different ways. People have all kinds of issues that are not particularly addressed by meditation practice.
Can you say anything more about the fear that is something in the realm of genuine responsibility? What's the relationship there?
If I'm following you, I would probably just fear of the unknown. Like, what would I get into if that starts to show up? All right, I'm responsible. So that's somewhat outside of the purview of ego, self-centeredness, because it won't do anything unless it understands what it is ahead of time. Sir.
What does the evaluation and judgment cover up in my mind stream?
Probably is covering up the more intuitive part of the consciousness, which is closer to wisdom. Might not be actual wisdom, but it may be beginning to see things through your awareness of what this is. You're going to need the concepts and the structures to get to that area. You can't just go to the mountaintop and meditate. At least my understanding of it is you need to do both. You need the intellect. It's called the two wings of the bird. You need both of those, just a way of talking about it. So if things get difficult or challenging, then in your situation, covered up with concepts and ideas and judgments and evaluations. And that needs to be seen, not corrected. Because if you try to correct it, well, it just doesn't work. You have to actually see it so that it starts to crack and come apart. That doesn't mean you no longer can think, but the thinking that you do, it's less about protecting something that isn't threatened in the first place and more about just using a structure to understand something in a certain way. So we do when we study the five dharmas of the Lanka, or the three own beings. Those are structures that help us open up areas of the mind stream that are caught in the trap of passion, aggression, ignorance, right and wrong, up and down, back and forth, hope and fear. Helps us go into those and take those apart intellectually or conceptually, so that there's more ventilation there. So there's a possibility that someone's insight about something can actually arise, so that you're not hindered by, can't be doing that, or I need more of this, or believing your emotions, believing your thoughts. Don't disbelieve them, but just because something arises in your mind stream doesn't make it the truth.
Does there need to be a willingness for that conceptual cover-up to stay there forever?
Sure. Good one. What is that addressing? There aren't two things anywhere. But as long as the mind is embroiled in right and wrong, should be and shouldn't be, you got to get rid of this. We got to stop this. That's why I say over and over again, and I'll say it again. It's about awareness. It is not about finding this, getting rid of that. It's about awareness, awareness, awareness. It transcends the Buddha's Dharma, because the Buddha's Dharma is up to the point. And then there's, of course, a lot of commentary on enlightenment. Go ahead.
Can I see the intuition if the conceptual cover-up is active?
There may be some awareness of the formlessness happening there. There could be some, but we tend to grasp onto something that looks like progress or looks like we're getting more insight into the emptiness of phenomena. More. Anyone else here? Go ahead, Hondo.
Hondo Bowing, you've often referred to yourself as stubborn. We work with an open approach to forms and yet be stubborn in pursuing our intention.
I think it's very individual. Everyone probably might feel like they have a certain amount of stubbornness. My stubbornness was extremely aggressive back in 1980 when I was at seminary in Lake Louise, Alberta, Canada. I just got tired of being, after 7 years of meditating and doing a lot of meditating, retreats and daktuns or month-long meditations. And I just got tired of not being able to sit there. And everyone else it looked like, probably not, but it looked like everyone else is sitting still but me. And I'm kind of moving this way. And now I do it, I move all the time, more than most people. But at that time, it was just, I had to find a way that's how I felt. So I was just very, very stubborn. And then I hurt myself. I hurt my knees by just making a kind of a pact with myself. I'm not moving no matter how much it hurts. So I'm going to ignore how my body feels, and I damaged my knees, and I've had trouble with them ever since. For 3 years, I couldn't even sit on the floor. I couldn't sit like this. This would be too painful. So, but I was still young enough. It was in my, I don't know, it was 39, I think, when that happened. And that's pretty young. So, but I don't feel like I'm addressing the question that you're asking about stubbornness.
It seems like there's got to be a middle way. How do you both follow Copen's teaching of observe, not obey, but yet at the same time?
So the way I sometimes say it, I'll say it now because I think it's is appropriate, is just return. Return. So just like if you're in the middle of a 4-hour block sit, and after 35 minutes your back hurts, or you feel really restless, rather than battle with that and try to not be restless. If restlessness arises in your mind stream, it is important to receive that restlessness. And that restlessness may be strong enough that you really need to get up and go out in the hallway. But if you do it with the communication of your body mind together, then you won't overdo anything. But the thinking mind, the processing mind, the judging and evaluating mind will immediately start to chastise you. Because if you shouldn't do that, you should be able to sit there. This is just baloney. But it's something that is all over the place as far as any kind of discipline, especially in Buddhist circles, from beginning of time until now. So if you work with that and receive that feeling, then you may get up and you may go out in the kitchen or look out the window for a few minutes. You may make some tea. And as you know, you're totally welcome to do that in this particular this particular community in Sangha. And if you need to do walking meditation, that's about your practice. It's not everybody doing it all at once because somebody rang the gong. But even though you might need to do it after 35 minutes, no, you have to wait till the 40-minute time limit. It's about control, and it's mainly because of masculine input there. So you may get up if you're doing it with an open discipline, which is looking at what's happening moment by moment instead of just clamping down. This is what's going to happen for the next 8 days or whatever, no matter what. Instead, you go into that and you have respect for yourself and for others, and you allow someone to work with discipline the way that they can. For some people, it's extremely difficult to sit still. I know I'm one of them. But went into it like, I'm going to sit here no matter what. It's painful. And so if you were to pay attention to your body and not lay a trip on yourself every time you got up because you're such a lazy meditator, but you actually appreciated that, you know you're going to come back. You might even come back just by walking out in the kitchen for 10 or 15 minutes, or having some tea, or going out into the garden. Of course, you don't want to do it in this weather, but you might find that you really do want to meditate. You really are inspired to train your mind to see clearly. So why would you stay out in the garden if it's time to sit and you live in a monastery, and if you have received precepts and you want to do this, so you would probably come back in. But if you didn't, if you went to wherever you live in the whole monastery campus, you might just go to your apartment and take a nap. But it would be situational. You'd be working with the situation. And if I'm there or involved in it, or anybody else that is functioning as the Shuso or the Ino, who's basically in charge of what's happening in the Zendo, they all know better than to go and chase somebody down. They might communicate. We might say, and if you did that, you would be asked to, if you leave, communicate. I'm going here. You don't have to say, do I have permission to go there? You just say, I'm going here. I need to lay down. I need some rest. Has anybody ever run into any issue where they had to ask permission if they don't feel good to go lay down? No, you're adults. If you have to be deceptive about that, then it's quite funny. And I'm sure you'll start laughing at yourself at some point, especially if nobody pays attention to your deception. Anyone online have a what are those called? Pomegranate. Mozuku.
Mozuku bowing. On the cushion, should there be an intention to have some discipline with the thinking mind? No.
If there's any discipline in that area, it should be to observe and not to comment. But if you do comment, then observe the comment. Always back into the awareness rather than proceed, necessarily go towards it. Receive, receive, receive. The world is going to supply you with all kinds of things to receive. Receive the thoughts, no comment. Receive the emotions, no comment, or no adjustment about that. Just receive it. Just receive it as if it's been served to, as if you just ordered that because you did. You ordered this life. It wasn't a being who ordered that. Your fundamental nature brought you into this. This is like a big school.
Mozuku bowing. Some of your meditation instructions, the instruction is to return to the body or return to the wall. I find that sometimes I can start maintaining awareness on the wall or the breath or the body, and I can't tell if I'm just avoiding the thinking mind by doing that.
Sounds fine, because you're aware of what you're doing. It's always about awareness, never some kind of awareness of what you're aware of, or doubling back on it, or getting some kind of credential out of being more aware than your thoughts, or more aware than the thinking. So just continue to do what you're doing. It won't last.
Thank you.
Certainly. Further, go ahead, Isaac.
How can I soften observing power?
How can you soften observing?
Yeah, it seems kind of controlling at times. Bowing.
That's awareness. That will wear out. Maybe not this year. Of course, there's only a few days left, so maybe it will. But it will wear out if you don't do anything with it. If you try to push on it, it will insist. If you try to get rid of it, if it's happening, and you're aware of it and you're able to ask about it. And how many hours a week do you do sitting meditation?
3 hours a day plus block sitting.
Okay.
Week.
Well, that's a lot of sitting. And I kind of already knew that, but I wanted, since I'm responding to you this way, I already know how much you sit. So, and does everybody else have to sit that much? Not necessarily. People who live in the monastery, there's plenty of available scheduled sitting time, but some people have jobs. Situational. We just do the best we can. Just because somebody lives here doesn't mean they're going to be sitting every single moment that is scheduled. Even if they don't have to work at a particular time, they might have other things that are going on in their life. So in your situation, just continue. Continue. Chisho.
Ishabhawing, in your response to Biyun, you're saying sit a lot and then you will be able to figure out how to shape your practice. At least that's what I heard.
I didn't say figure out. I didn't say figure out. I don't figure anything out. But you can go ahead and talk, and I'll see if I can figure out what you're talking about.
So my question is, do people have to first sit a lot and then let the practice take its shape after that? Wow.
I wouldn't say that that's always the case, but I would say that that's, for some people, that's what would be the best approach to take, would be to do a lot of sitting and allow the various judgments and evaluations that kind of that pop up out of nowhere that preoccupy our afternoon sitting practice, or trying to figure this out or think of this, or is this right, is this wrong, should I or shouldn't I, am I doing this okay, on and on. So I think it's a little of each. Everyone is the way I usually say it is everyone is wired so differently. You know, some people are very conceptual, intellectual, structural, and formal, and actually live that way. They actually do that with their kitchen silverware when they put things back in it. Is that funny? You know someone like that? Who is he? Some people are very, very structural. And when they see somebody who's not that way, they can't understand like how they can even live and not keep track of everything in a certain, tit for tat way. Keep track of everything. Everything needs to be labeled in the same place. And it just looks like, well, that's just the way you do things. And other people do not live that way at all. So that is one way of talking about or saying something about the complete variability of each person's practice. And that's why I feel, based on my life as a meditator, is so important. I did not get much help situationally from either one of my teachers, but I got the help, exactly the help I needed at the time I needed it. I would have liked to have had a lot more, but it just didn't show up that way. They were coming out of a different culture, a different way of discipline, a different way of working with the mind stream, and a different way of working with students. And so that's what I had. But I see it a little bit differently in that I feel like it's very important to talk to people individually if they'll come this way. Some people don't come this way very much. That's up to them. No real requirement. I don't say you have to have so many interviews a week or a month or something like that, or even a year. It's up to you to decide if you need to do that or you want to do that. But I guess what I'm addressing or trying to address is it's so different with each person. And to go back to your question and the response, the way it was showing up, yes, you may have to just sit a lot before you come up with more understanding about how to work with your particular situational, open or mutual discipline.
Bowing. What's complete discipline the way you're talking about it versus the controlling Marine Corps style bowing?
So paying attention, because you're a meditator, you're going to be much more clear about what's happening in your mind stream. It may not be comfortable, but you'll be more clear. You need to be the one who is in charge of your practice. But you may need to, and other people may need to have a very strong form already set up as we have here. Do you understand the form? You live here and you practice forms and you're a fully ordained monk. You practice these forms. So what is it you really want to know? Other than you want that question answered.
I'm just having a hard time seeing discipline that's complete without that control. What is it to not have control of the discipline?
So there may be some control to start with, but it's the demand part of it that gets us wrapped up in passion, aggression, and ignorance, where we start to get a credential for being so very disciplined, more disciplined than other people, comparing ourselves, our own discipline, to others.
Is there a weight adjustment? Like, is the weight still there in the discipline?
I can say very sincerely, it's all going to be heavy lifting if it comes to the Buddha Dharma and discipline in the Buddha Dharma. But it needs to be tuned in with your dynamic, with your karma, with how you got into this human realm in the first place, or the second place, or the third place. It needs to be that. So we need to be very respectful to each person. And that's what I am endeavoring to do as a teacher, is to respect you. And I can, of all the people here, I know all of you fairly well. And I see no two people alike anywhere, as far as their discipline or their understanding or how they're going to approach the Dharma. I see people come and go and come. I see people fasten right down on something for in one way, and then someone else does not do that. Their discipline is a different kind. Their life, their practice is different. It's not going to show up as something that you necessarily are going to agree with. And that's why I say over and over again, don't teach unless you have to. If you start teaching out of what you know and what you think and what you evaluate, all you're going to do is make problems for people. Don't do it. I don't teach out of what I think, or what I teach out of what I'm looking at. If you come in front of me, I'm looking at you. It's as if I've never seen you before. I don't have any package of protocols behind me here, including the Buddha's Dharma, of how this should be done or how you should be treated. Just like Kodo has been a student of mine off and on for 20 some years. And it took him forever to come and ask for, what do we call that? Jukai. But I never mentioned it to him, although I felt that would be a good thing for him to do. We've talked off and on for, I don't know, didn't I teach you how to meditate 20 some years ago? I don't know when it was, 20 years ago? Yeah. So everybody needs to be respected where they're at on the path. Everyone's path is completely unique. If you could really see what is happening in with Kodo or David or Jalen or Augie or anybody, it would be almost like they're not even practicing Buddhism, because it doesn't align with what you're studying. But it's Buddhism. There's a lot of room for questions there. We're a little bit out of time, but not really. If you have a question, take us into that. I will help you by responding to you out of what I'm looking at, not something I've memorized, and not teaches 7 points of mind training, although I think it's a valuable thing to study.
Ivan bowing.
Go ahead, Ivan.
Is there a desire behind the discipline? Bowing. Is that enough of a question?
It's close. A desire behind the discipline?
Yes, it seems like discipline, there's a discipline to get it done, but there's a desire behind the discipline to sit longer, for instance. What is, if that's the case, what is the crossroads between desire and discipline?
I think they work together. The way I think of discipline is just, it's a form that you acknowledge that you, on some level, you need to train your mind to see clearly, see more clearly. You're aware of your self-deception. You're aware of your circularity. You wouldn't be here unless you had some clarity about the confusion. I'll say it again. You would not be here if you didn't have some clarity about the way in which you're confused. That's called the path. And that's what the Buddha basically did. That's all we're doing is doing what he pointed at. But it shows up in just incredibly outrageous variations of how this is done. That teaching of the Buddha is so universal, so completely amazing. And so the function of the teaching person, as I see it, is to encourage you to find out who you are. And that doesn't mean find out who I think you are. You may have to leave. You may have to go somewhere else. There's no propaganda here saying that this is the only way you can train your mind. But that being said, I'm very biased about this. And you probably run into that already. Is there a final question? Go ahead.
Shodo bowing. When you say that you teach out of what you see, what is it that you see?
I see who you are, and I see who you think you are. I'll say it again. I see who you think you are, and I see who you are. And it's not a credential. I don't have any, I can't show you my badge, or I don't have any proof of that. You come and ask me questions and I respond to them. And if I don't respond to them in a way that is fundamentally helpful to you, to your Buddha nature, or to your intelligence, or however you want to characterize it, you're not going to stay here. Go somewhere else. You're still here. What's in it for you? What's in it for me? That's a rhetorical question, the kind you have to answer. Nah, you don't have to answer. So what do you, is there some area, something you want to know about? That's a good question, but you can take it deeper if you rephrase your question.
Shodo bowing. Is what you see more than just teaching situationally?
If you don't ask me a question, I'm not likely to say much. It's one of the most difficult things to do here is come up with a talk title. And the talk title tonight just came up with the last few minutes. Maybe, I don't know, when did I send that to you? 5 minutes to 8? That's when I thought of it. I don't know. I was going to come in and do mountains and rivers. Have you asked questions? So I try to have a topic if I can. That way it gives us somewhere to move around. Whereas if I just do mountains and rivers, although that can be good too, depending on the questions. People ask questions. But I'm teaching out of what I'm looking at. When I say looking, I'm saying seeing, smelling, tasting, touching, thinking, I'm not thinking about it like figuring it out. The thoughts that arise here are dependently arisen, as are yours. You personalize yours. I don't. And if I do, I suffer. So I know about it. Every now and then I get a big reminder. Awakening is not a state of mind. And I make no claims. And anyone that claims has a ways to go, because it isn't anything in particular.
Sort of bowing. When we are personalizing things and suffering because of it, is it more about needing to continue to look at that than it is about us doing something incorrectly?
Somewhat. Can you paraphrase what you just said?
If we see that we're giving ourselves a hard time, do we just need to keep looking at that?
Yes. Get to know yourself deeply, just like if you had an unruly child. I mean, there is a way that's been said in the past where you just hit them. You know, I was in that 1940s and 50s era where that's what is done. Several of us were. We don't do that. We look at the negativity that rises in the mind stream. We don't shut it down. We look at it with some curiosity. Watch what it does. Watch how it gets stronger or weaker. What seems to go ahead.
Sure, going. What is the curiosity when the negativity is really intense?
Necessary. Then you ask me what it was. I said it's necessary. Be very curious about the negativity, because if you're curious, then there's some kind of a looking into it, some kind of exploration or beginning to look at the texture of it. But if there's no curiosity at all about it, then we tend to clamp down on blame, or, well, it's because, well, if she hadn't said, or if they hadn't done, then but the pain that is coming up, the difficulty that's coming up in our mind stream is your own. It's not yours from the point of view of ownership. It's yours from the point of view of the same thing that created your ears and your eyes and your whole body-mind complex. It's also your karma from past lifetimes, would be a way of saying it. It's not necessarily the truth. We don't know if there is past lifetimes or not. Trying to bring something in that situation into relative truth to prove it is a waste of time. A lot more important things to work with than that. One of them is meditate. More?
Sure, bowing. It seems like in my experience, when something's intense, the last thing the ego wants to be is curious about it. It just wants to shut down. Is there a way to cut through with the curiosity?
Well, you've already talked about it in such a way that says you're very aware that you're trying to pull out of there. That's also awareness. So I would, there are techniques that talk about cutting. The Tibetans have the chud practice, which is a kind of cutting practice. There's a book title of Trungpa's book, Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism. So I think it just means, my understanding is just to look at the spiritual materialism, just look at the craziness of our mind that is pushing or pulling or shutting down or moving this way or turning off, just to observe that structure of I'm sorry, I didn't mean to bless you. Passion, aggression, initiatives.
Can't do.
Right back at you. So it's about, as I've said hundreds of times, millions of times, 20,000 times, it's about the awareness, not what arises in it. What arises in it is going to come and go. The awareness never does anything. And if you realize your true nature, you will never do anything. Things will get done, but there will be no doer. Isn't that a Scotch? Doers? There won't be any. Can't drink in the monastery. But you can, right down the street, you can. More?
Thank you.
Okay, very good. We can close at this point. I think we